Hi there. My name is Vladimir Lavacek, and I would like to showcase you some of the capabilities of what AWS Amplify offers. A little bit maybe about me. Uh, I'm a technology architect here at Accenture. Uh, Even though I'm also a team lead, I actually still develop quite a lot. So so I will actually show you one of the frameworks that we are using for very fast development in our Liquid Studio for some of our prototype applications. Right? And I would actually like to show this on an example. That's why I actually taken one of the applications that we are building and simplified it a little bit. So what I would like to do is to showcase this on an application that you can imagine as a very simple Strava or Garmin-like application to track activities of multiple people. So you can have some sort of registration, adding of new activities, I don't know, biking or something else. And you also have a leaderboard, right? Because you always want to see who is the best one. And how we are going to build this? Yes, of course, on AWS. And the main service we are going to use is AWS Amplify. But AWS Amplify is actually a framework or tool set which is gluing kind of together many AWS frameworks. And this is actually a simplified set what we are going to pick from this like number of frameworks. So for AWS Amplify, we are actually going to use mainly AWS AppSync, which is a GraphQL schema-based service to generate backend. And we are using DynamoDB, which is a serverless database on the cloud, very scalable, that we are going to use for storing our data. We will use a React frontend for our application, right? Because that's like kind of nice and standard. But what is very important, AWS Amplify has client libraries which can be used in React. They can be used on iPhone, on Android. They could be even used. I even found the Flutter library, which is in progress. So even a little bit fancier frameworks. But for simplicity, we will showcase some of the capabilities in React. We will also use AWS Cognito, which is an authentication service for user registration. And for our leaderboard, actually, we will use a function which will listen on updates from DynamoDB, and it will actually update the database itself when there are new entries inserted into the DynamoDB tables. So with this, I would actually go to our Visual Studio Code. Here I have started basically just a standard create React app application. There is really nothing else. If we run this application with Yarn, there is the application itself plus edit libraries, right? So if the application starts up, we should be seeing something like come on, it doesn't like me that much. So, but basically, I had it started from before, right? So this is the application when it is running. So there's really nothing in there, right? And we are going to add actually Amplify into this application, right? So with that, now it's starting up. With that, Amplify itself is available for developers mainly as a CLI, right? So I can actually start up the application, start building the application using the Amplify CLI. If I can actually have some help available, which typically prints out like what are the commands available, and we should be able to see that. Yeah, so you can see like all the commands and which are given. But what we are going to do now, we are in our front-end project, and let us initialize the application for Amplify, right? So Amplify init initializes the new project. It will be named activity track. We can choose the environment. Actually, with Amplify, you can have many environments, as many as you would like for your application. So, for example, it has capabilities of environments per branch, for example, in Git, or you can have like development, production, whatever you pick. So let's do that. Pick up the code editor. VS Code in my case. And we will use JavaScript, but you can see there are other frameworks. We will use React. So here is a sample of what they support currently. We will use React, and it did auto. I kind of has prepared the locations for React app, so we can just pick it up. And we will go for actually initializing our project on AWS Amplify. So just give it a few moments, because this is already starting to communicate with the cloud, I think. Yeah, so now we are going to use an AWS profile, which would be my default profile. And now it's actually creating it, right? So on AWS, there is an Amplify console. So Amplify is one of the services available. So if you look for Amplify, you can see directly we actually have our application already being created, and you can use this Amplify console as like a central point where you actually can view your application and do the setup, or even delete it if you would like to, right? So we can see like front end, back end, and so on. We will go a little bit further into these in a minute. So let's go back to our console. And what I will do now, I'll put it on top. And what I will do now is I will add an API to my project. And for adding API, we can actually choose whether we want the Graphql API or REST. Graphql is backed by AWS AppSync, the service that I've shown in my architecture. And the REST interface is actually provided just by AWS API Gateway, right? So Lambdas and API Gateway. So let's go with GraphQL. We can choose the API name. And here we go for the authentication. And the primary authentication for our application will be Amazon Cognito, as was shown on the picture, right? So we will use that one. And we can actually go for some configuration if you want, but for simplicity, we'll just skip it and use the default configuration. And we'll use email to sign in the users, right? And for this one, I think we are done. We don't want to configure any advanced settings. And we will be asked if we want to make some additional changes. And in this case, I will say yes, because we want to have additional authentication types. In AWS, when you call the services, you typically use some policies, some IAM keys, or these kind of things, right? Or some roles and so on. For our application, when there will be front end calling it, it will use the authentication from AWS Cognito. But we also want to update the leaderboard with our Lambda function. And this function will actually use IAM roles and IAM to authenticate against changes. So that's why we actually want our application to have also IAM authentication enabled. So we'll use this one. Config detection, no, we don't want it. Annotated GraphQL schema, no, in this case. And here we can pick up a schema template. So AWS Amplify, the API in our case, will be driven by a GraphQL schema. So within this GraphQL schema, we actually define our entities, how our data will be structured, and also some other things. I will show it around a little bit. And we can actually use a little bit an example. So we will pick up one-to-many relationship. And now we can edit the schema if we want. But let's say no for the time being. I will show the schema later. Okay, I could actually show the schema. So in our project now, we have an Amplify folder in the React application, and there is actually the GraphQL schema generated here. As you can see, this is a very simple GraphQL schema, but I will replace it because I already have prepared a GraphQL schema for our application. So what I will do, I will put there a GraphQL schema for our application. For the time being, I will save it. because I want to do other things and push the application. So it actually is on AWS because that really takes some time, and we will come back to the schema a little bit later. So now back to the console. I will do another thing, which is adding the function, which will populate our leaderboard. So Amplify add function. With this, you can actually add function for any custom logic, right? So in our case, it can be, yes, it will be Lambda function. It will be named, okay, we can keep this update. The leaderboard will be, I will just for sure pick up some suffix. We can pick up a language. Node.js will do JavaScript. And we will not do hello world. We will not do CRUD function for DynamoDB, but we will do a Lambda trigger. These triggers can be actually triggered. You can see DynamoDB or Kinesis. In our case, we will pick up DynamoDB stream, which basically it's like a PLSQL procedure, if you remember Oracle, right? So if you insert something to the database, our function will be triggered. So in our case, when we insert the activity into the database, the function will be actually triggered, and we can do custom logic in that. In our case, we'll create a leaderboard entry, right? So we will update the leaderboard for all the users. So let's do DynamoDB, and we can actually choose which DynamoDB table it should respond to. So we will pick up activity as our table for events. We want to access in this project other resources. Yes, in this case we want, and we want to access the API itself. So what our function will actually do, it will get an event from DynamoDB when something is inserted into the database, and it will call an API to create the leaderboard entries, right? So we will use, yes, we will use an API, and yeah, a colleague of mine said larger font, sorry for that, I can do that. Thanks a lot. So let's go. We can put multiple operations to select. We will select multiple operations for this, and now it will ask. Okay, we don't want to do a recurring schedule. We don't want to do lambda layers, and we can actually edit the function, right? I will put yes here because it should open the function for me, and it actually generates a sample function, which only thing that it does, it's actually logging the records. I think I can put larger of this one, just to be sure. Hopefully that's better. So what we will now do is I will put there the function code, and we will also come back to this because I want to push it. So let's just a second. What we will also need to do is install some libraries for the function. So let's go there to the function, Amplify, backend functions, activity track source, and we will install a couple of libraries which we will use for communication. So what we are going to use? We are going to use GraphQL and AWS AppSync for communication, right? So let's install that. Just a second. Here we are. So I will install the libraries that we need. I hope this doesn't take that much time, but we can go back to the console in the meantime. So I think that's mostly it, yes. Okay, so it prints us some commands that we can actually do, right? We can build the functions, which is not so interesting. This one is quite interesting. Amplify mock function, you can run the functions. You can actually mock also the API locally if you need for local development. So you can build frontend, for example, just using a mock API, which is running just locally. Also, you can push the changes, which is what we are going to do in a short while. And you can publish everything, including the frontend. Push is just updating the backend, but publish is actually pushing the frontend and backend together to AWS, and you can get a real application deployed with the front end, with the backend completely running quite easily, right? So let's show, okay, we installed the dependencies. So now what we are going to do is amplify push. Let's try it out. And let's see what it will do. Okay, so what it now says, it is asking to update authentication API and function. So the authentication part is covering AWS AppSync and DynamoDB. The API, the authentication is for Cognito. API is covering AppSync and DynamoDB, and function is our backend function to call it, right? So let's push it. Yes, we want to continue, and I think now it's actually starting to do all the updates. But I think it still asks a few questions. So you can see if you are building an application with AWS Amplify, it's always you are kind of using the CLI, right? So you do some updates, you push them to the cloud, you can test them. You can test the updates, of course, locally, or you push them to the cloud and actually run a little bit, right? So this is the typical workflow, but it's all quite well integrated into the CLI, so that helps quite a lot. And I'm thinking what it is actually doing now. Uploading files. Almost there. I think it's slower internet because of the presentation. So sorry for that. Yeah, okay. Do I want to generate code for my Graphql API? Yes, I do. Because Amplify is actually generating me client-side code. In our case, this means TypeScript artifacts, so I will choose TypeScript. And I will keep the defaults for everything. So I will use the path, and I want to generate Graphql operations, yes. And you can decide which nesting levels you want to do, because in Graphql you can query deeper than just one level. And we'll keep 2, and source API TypeScript, right? And now I think it is finally starting to generate everything. So we have some time. We have actually quite a lot of time. So then what we are going to do is actually take a look at the Graphql schema itself, what we actually have done. In our Graphql schema, we have 3 main entities, right? So we have activity type, activity, and leaderboard entry. Activity type is just like a meta type for the activities, right? So we will define that, okay, we will have a biking activity for, I don't know, someone will get 2 points for every kilometer they have ridden on the bike, or 10 points they have done on the bike, and so on. We can have some like UI attributes, like, okay, I have some amount description, I have some unit, or like kilometers or whatever, right? So that's activity type. Then we have an activity, which is actually when user is adding an activity to our application. So here we have actually a reference to an activity type, which is like a relationship. And actually, when you do this in such a schema, you can use these connections. If you know Hibernate, it's actually very similar how you define how your data model is actually related to another, one field to another, and so on. So similar as in SQL or whatever similar languages, right? And we are storing email and username for the users because we want to show them on the UI. The amount, how much actually the user has, I don't know, ridden on a bike or walked. Description, the points calculated from, okay, so it will be, the points should be the amount times points per amount, right? So we will get calculated the points, and we have some features like created event and some groupings, right? And then we have a leaderboard entry, which is actually something which users shouldn't edit at all, and this will be updated only by the backend function, nothing else. That one should touch it. So we will have there the name, email, and we have the total points. And we will actually order this based on the total points to show how many, like who is the first, who is the second, and so on. And in the GraphQL schema, you can actually have some other things. You can have authentication rules, right? So for example, in our case, we say, okay, so this entity can be read by anyone who is authenticated. This is what this rule says. And it can be edited. It can be created by only someone who is in the role admin in AWS Cognito, or anyone who is in like IAM with like IAM authentication. More interesting is, for example, for activity, where we say that owner of the activity can actually create, delete, and update. So AWS will kind of the app sync will identify, okay, this is the currently logged user. He's the owner of the activity. He can delete it or update it if he wants to. And then we have also similar, but also all the other users can just read the activities. So other users cannot actually delete activities by someone else. And I think that's it. And what we also can define in the schema, beside the connections, we can actually also define some sort keys and indexes within DynamoDB, which we can then use for querying. So what we, for example, have here are some keys which will list the activities ordered by created at, because there is some logic in DynamoDB of the indexes. That's why the second index is actually a sort index, sort key. So it will be sorted by created at. And this query field will be actually the name of the operation that we will see in the GraphQL, which we can use to use this index in the database, right? So in the GraphQL schema, in the GraphQL operations, we will have this operation for this specific index usage, right? So these are just a sample of the things that we can really build in the GraphQL schema, but there are also other annotations which can be read and which are available on the documentation. All right, and I will check how my AWS is looking. So far I don't see anything red, which is typically a good sign, I would say. But as you can see, it's taking a while. It is using AWS CloudFormation in the backend. So this is amplifies really a collection of other frameworks, of other toolkits on AWS. But a really good one, I would say, a really nice integration of all together. So while this is still running, I would actually like to show you also the function that we've created. So what the function is actually doing, right? It has a GraphQL client. It listens on events from DynamoDB, but for updates, it cannot do the updates directly to DynamoDB. It has to call the GraphQL API, similar as all the other functions. And this is actually, I would say, more robust approach than to update directly DynamoDB. But what we can do there, we can define some GraphQL queries. For example, okay, I want leaderboard entries by owner. I might have an activity type I might fetch, and I can create a leaderboard entry or update a leaderboard entry. And what the function is actually doing itself, it will get a record from the database. It will look up for the activity type because it needs to calculate the score for the activity, right? So that's why it needs the activity type, because it's not stored together. And after that, it will actually try to look for the current leaderboard entry for the user. So it will find what's the current entry in the database. If it has an existing entry, then it will update it with a mutation, right? So here you can, for example, see this is how we create the mutation. This is the GraphQL with some variables, and we call the GraphQL client for the updates, right? So this is the API of AWS AppSync, not strictly AWS Amplify, because that one has a little bit different client library, but there it is actually very similar, and we will show it in the content. And I think that's it basically for this function. This is just some code because it gets multiple records and some error handling. That's it, right? And let's see how this still is updating. No, I think we are actually quite close because it's already trying to generate the code for me, and we are there, right? So what we've got generated a GraphQL endpoint, and if we go now to the browser, we can actually see here a little bit more. So we go to the backend environments. I need to reload it. Okay, let's go here. And here we see what we have: authentication, which is AWS Cognito, right? So you can view this incognito. You can manage the users and so on. There is API, which is AWS AppSync, and DynamoDB, right? So here we can see all the tables that have been created, and we can do some editing. There is also a possibility to add other things to Amplify. For example, file storage, analytics with some other services. I think AWS has functions we actually use for our updating of the leaderboard. Here we might monitor the logs, right? So, but you can still go to AWS Lambda or CloudWatch if you want to see the logs. So really like a central point where we can see all the other things about. So let's first go to the API, and I will go to view in AppSync, because what you can do here is, and what is kind of nice, you can use AWS AppSync to do the GraphQL queries. And this is very handy. I mean, you can do this in the mock mode for local development, but it is actually very handy for operations when you want to do some like fast querying and so on, right? So let's try to select the activity types, right? And let's see what it gives back. Right now, I don't have any data. But what I actually would like to do is insert some data into the activity types. And for that, I have prepared the GraphQL mutations. So let's go back. I will do a couple of mutations. And what we have here is to create an activity type. Yeah, there are some. Let's run it. 1, 2, 3. And now if I do this listing again, so list activity types, items, I will select all of them. And let's go. We actually have now some activity types in the database. So how much you run in this activity, how much you walked in this activity, how much you biked, right? So we have biking, we have walking, we have running. So we have some data which we can actually use. And now let's finally go to our frontend. So we'll go back. We are in the frontend, right? And what we are going to do is put here a couple of frontend files. I already have the frontend developed. Sorry for that. I'm not going to paste. I'm not going to go through all of the frontend code one by one because I more wanted to show the API, sorry, the Amplify. But I will showcase you some of the basics, right? So let's remove this one, and I will paste there the code. So like this, and start it up. So what we actually got is also generated. We got generated API TS, which is TypeScript types for our GraphQL operations. So you can really do a full TypeScript with GraphQL. You can use these in your operations. We got also generated before queries and mutations, which is like some basic queries and basic mutations that you can use in your application. But what I found out is sometimes you don't want to query everything, and we actually use them as a basis for our application and then modify them. And then what we have is we have an application, FTS, which has a couple of things. First, we configure the Amplify because there is a AWS exports file which is generated by Amplify, and this is what we are using, like a configuration. And we have also some library for Amplify from React, which we are using, right? And this one also. Very nice is this with authenticator. This is like a high order component which you can use in your application. And if we do this, the application will automatically use the authentication that you have configured in your app. So in our case, it will use AWS Cognito, right? And with this, it will actually do like a sign-in page directly within the app. So it's actually not going to Cognito, but it's calling it in the backend. Then what we have in this basic app, we just have a couple of routes, and the routes are actually quite simple. So what they do, they are doing some like there is a state, some fetching of data, and typically some updates of data. What's more interesting are these fetch queries. I have here API client, which is my written code, but it's importing the queries and mutations from AWS Amplify. And here we, for example, can see how we can execute the Graphql operation using the Amplify API, right? So we say, okay, GraphQL with the list activity types, which is actually this kind of GraphQL operation, which was generated by the full toolkit, right? So we can actually use that within our application. And I think that's the most interesting part. So really, you can use the API for triggering. And I wonder why my application is not starting. So let's see. It's still being compiled. That's like that. Okay. Now it's there, right? So let me show you the application itself. So this is when the application starts up, right? It detected this with authenticator, and we can actually log in, right? Unfortunately, I don't have an account, so let's create one. I will go from Accenture, make some dummy password, use the same email, and create an account. And now what it has done with AWS Cognito, with the default flow, it sent me a code, which I should get in my email. So just a second. I will check my email for the code. If it wasn't so slow. So let me see the emails. And I have my code in my email. So let's put it here, and I should get an account, and I should be directly signed into the application. Right now, there is really nothing, right? So activities and the leaderboard. I'm not a UI developer, so we are just using Material UI. Okay, I would say I'm not a good UI designer and so on, right? So please apologize, but I really want to demonstrate Amplify more than React itself, right? So what we can do is we here have a list of activity types. So this is based on the activity types, and we can actually add activities, right? So let's add. No, I don't do that much running. I run just 1 kilometer. Sorry. So I will add running, and I have it for 20 points. Okay. I will add biking. And there is actually a very nice event in Slovakia, which is doing 315 kilometers in a day. So let's say I have done that one. Oh, that's a number of points. With this, actually, any users can add the activities, and we can see the email that actually went into the database. And we also have a leaderboard, right, where it calculated. We can now register more users, and we can get more data into the application. And with that, I mean, you can go further with Amplify, right? You can go pushing it, you can publish it into the internet with authentication, and we've done like a full application. Okay, I copied the front-end code, but the backend was done in like half an hour. And with that, I would say I will be happy to answer any of your questions. And thank you very much for being here and watching.